Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? Today we're looking into the 1997 disappearance of Michelle Een.
It's a case that really sticks with you.
Yeah, Michelle was a 26-year-old black woman from Poughkeepsie, New York. And,
And her story is especially intriguing because she disappeared around the same time a bunch of other women went missing in the area.
exactly. And the podcast episode you shared really got me thinking about all the unanswered questions in this case.
Plus,
Plus,
it seems like Michelle's case didn't get as much attention as the other missing women,
which is really troubling when you think about it.
it is.
So, we're going to try to piece together what happened using everything you've given me. Social worker reports, police interviews, witness statements.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle with some of the pieces missing.
A puzzle where some of the pieces might be gone forever.
Yeah, and that's sadly pretty common in cases that involve people like Michelle.
You mean because she was struggling with substance use disorder and involved in sex work?
Right, those factors often mean that these cases are overlooked, sometimes even by the police, which is...
It's awful.
But let's start with Michelle. Like, who was she as a person?
Well, the social worker reports paint a really interesting picture. It challenges those stereotypes we often see about sex workers.
Okay, I'm listening.
Michelle really wanted to be a good mom to her 3 kids. She talked about wanting stability, wanting to reunite with her children.
There was even that detail about her baking cookies for her caseworkers.
I know, right? It shows a different side to her, a side that often gets lost in these kinds of cases.
Absolutely. But the reports also talk about her relationship with George. He
This
was...
on-again, off-again boyfriend.
Yeah, and it seems like things were pretty rocky between them.
We know that Michelle actually reported George's abuse to the police a few times.
Oh, wow.
And that's important for a couple of reasons. First, it shows how dangerous the situation was for Michelle. But it also
shows that she still trusted the police to help her, even though her life was really complicated.
you got. And Michelle's friend Antonia backs all this up. She saw George's abuse firsthand, and she said Michelle wanted to escape that life, get back to her kids.
Right, but then there's this whole other layer to the story. The possibility that Michelle was pregnant when she vanished.
Yeah, that definitely adds another twist, especially when you consider she was potentially in an abusive relationship.
It's hard to know for sure because the details are pretty unclear. We might never know if it was a factor in her disappearance.
So we've got this picture of Michelle, her hopes, and the dangerous situation she was in. But what about the people around her?
Well, the podcast names a few potential suspects,
And
and
some of them are pretty scary,
I mean, George is an obvious person of interest because of the abuse.
right? Was he jealous? Was he angry about maybe being the father of another child?
Could be. Or maybe he just wanted to make sure Michelle didn't talk.
And his behavior during those police interviews is super shady, always deflecting blame, giving vague answers.
Almost like he's trying to stay one step ahead of the investigation.
Then there are those drug dealers that Michelle and George apparently ripped off.
Oh, yeah. That whole thing where Michelle told Officer Bob Prada about the theft before she disappeared is just...
It's chilling, like she knew something bad was coming.
But then there's Danielle. You know, that confidential informant. She gives a totally different version of what happened with the drugs.
Which makes the timeline even more confusing.
It just shows how hard it is for investigators to get a straight story when witnesses are struggling with their own issues.
Totally. And then we have Kendall Francois. He was known for soliciting sex workers and even got arrested for it a few months before Michelle vanished.
And then later he becomes a suspect in all those other missing women cases. Makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah, and his reaction when the cops asked him about the missing women during that arrest is
Ice cold, like it didn't even bother him.
crazy, right?
Oh,
And things are about to get even more complicated from here.
definitely. Because the podcast introduces a few more people that the police looked at.
Yeah.
It just shows how tangled Michelle's life was.
Like Royce. He'd been convicted of rape before and was known to have a problem with sex workers.
And then there's Anthony. He said he had information about what happened to Michelle but never actually gave the police anything solid.
So many people involved, so many potential leads, but no real answers.
It's frustrating, captivating, and heartbreaking all at the same time.
Michelle's life was complex, her work was dangerous, and sometimes it feels like the system is rigged against people like her.
It's true. And that's why we need to approach this case with an open mind. We have to consider every angle and acknowledge that sometimes things aren't fair.
You're right. This isn't just about solving a mystery. It's about understanding the bigger picture.
And we need to keep that in mind as we dig deeper into this case.
Okay, so where do we go from here? What's the next piece of this puzzle?
So the police were dealing with a ton of potential suspects, dead ends everywhere.
Yeah, it felt like they were going in circles. But then in January of 98, everything changes.
The investigation shifts back to Kendall Francois, the guy who...
The guy who acted so weird when they asked him about the missing women.
Exactly. And then things get really crazy. He confesses.
He confesses to what?
To killing 8 women, including Michelle. And get this.
What?
He takes the police to his family's house. To the attic.
Oh, no.
And that's where they find them. 8 bodies hidden away.
It's like something out of a horror movie.
It's hard to even imagine the shock when they found those bodies. This case that had been so confusing suddenly becomes this horrible tragedy.
It's almost unbelievable. This guy was living a normal life with his family while all of this was going on.
Right. It makes you think about how people can hide such awful secrets.
And what about his family? Did they know?
Some people said there was a bad smell coming from the attic.
I know. It's chilling to think they might have just ignored it. Maybe they didn't want to believe anything was wrong.
So Kendall confesses to killing Michelle. Does that finally close the case?
Not really. There's still a lot of loose ends. For starters,
Okay, what do you mean?
Kendall said he only killed white women, but Michelle was black. So his confession doesn't make sense.
Right. It makes you question if anything he said was true.
And did they find any evidence connecting Michelle to Kendall or his house?
Nope, nothing. So they have his confession, but no proof.
Wow.
And here's the biggest problem. They never actually identified Michelle's body among the ones they found.
You're kidding.
Back then, DNA testing wasn't what it is today. So even though Kendall was convicted for killing the other women...
And he's in prison for life, right?
Yeah. But technically, Michelle's case is still unsolved.
That's devastating for her family and friends. They're probably still searching for answers after all these years.
It's a reminder that justice isn't always served, especially for people who are already marginalized.
It makes you wonder if her case would have been handled differently if things were different.
It's a sad reality, and it shows why we need to keep fighting for justice for everyone, no matter who they are or what they've been through.
Okay, so we have this confession that doesn't quite fit the facts, no physical evidence, and a missing body. Where do we go from here?
Well, that's what we'll talk about in the last part of this deep dive. We'll look at the questions that are still unanswered and what Michelle's case tells us about the fight for justice for those who are often ignored.
I have to say, after going through all of this, I'm feeling like we have way more questions than answers.
Yeah.
Kendall Francois confessed.
But it doesn't line up with everything else we know about Michelle.
Right, like giving us a puzzle piece, but it's from the wrong puzzle.
That's a great way to put it. Confessions can be tricky.
How so?
Well, sometimes they happen under pressure from the police, or someone might want to be famous,
Or
or...
maybe they're not even in their right mind. Or they've convinced themselves of something that didn't happen.
Exactly. So did Kendall really do it? Was there another reason he confessed?
I guess we'll never really know. What about Michelle's family? Have they spoken about any of this?
It must be incredibly painful for them, not knowing the truth, having this confession that doesn't add up, and...
And it seems like their case got overshadowed by all the other women Kendall was convicted of killing.
Yeah. And that's a problem we see a lot. The search for justice can be...
Messy.
Complicated. A lot of times it doesn't feel like enough.
And it just highlights why it's so important to fight for people like Michelle.
To make sure their stories are told and investigated properly, no matter what their life was like.
Michelle deserves justice, and so do all the other women who went missing.
We can't let them be forgotten.
So what can we do? How do we make a difference?
We have to start by understanding the realities of sex work and substance use disorder and how the system often fails these folks.
And then we use our voices to speak up for them.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
We can't be silent. We need to push for transparency from the police support organizations that are helping and fight for policies that actually protect those who need it most.
We obviously can't bring Michelle back, but maybe we can learn from this and prevent something like this from happening again.
It's about honoring her memory by making the world safer for everyone.
This whole deep dive has been really eye-opening. We can't just let Michelle's case disappear. We can't let any of these cases disappear. We have to keep asking questions, keep searching for truth, and keep fighting for those who can't fight for themselves.
I like that. Keep fighting for what's right. This has been an incredibly powerful conversation. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with me and our listeners.
Of course, it's been my pleasure.
We may never have all the answers, but that shouldn't stop us from trying. To all our listeners out there, thank you for listening. We hope this deep dive got you thinking and maybe even inspired you to take action. Remember, even small things can make a difference. Speak up, get involved, and never stop fighting for what you believe in.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep on diving deep.